technology is always a solution in the crisis. So technology will be really handy. There are multiple areas in which this technology would be adopted. One area is in the conduction of admission tests, the learning space.
For online education to really become mainstream and enroll, millions of students rather than hundreds of thousands of students, we need to have online degrees that are accredited by the various agencies.
My message to all the students and the higher education stakeholders is we need to double our efforts in this time in order to sustain and keep our economy afloat.
In India, we have to look at technology and education 4.0 as actually providing education to the uneducated, people who are not getting quality education.
Education 3.0 was nothing but technology driven. This is now going to be a permanent feature and is now going to figure in all the teaching learning activities of times to come.
Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to yet another College Dunia Connect chapter. As we all know, that the education policy has been approved by the Union government and is now the talk of the town. Every student as well as education institute is trying to understand the policy and the impact that it will bring on the education system in the country. Hence, College Dunia Current brings the stalwarts of higher education industry together on one platform, wherein we want to discuss the new policy going into the future and how it is going to shape the entire education system in the country. The education policy has been modified after a 34-year long duration, bringing a new era of education in the country. There are nearly 20 major changes that have been incorporated, such as higher education institutes shall aim to become multidisciplinary, bachelor's degree will have multiple exit options, and one of the most crucial change is that the structure 10+2 in the education system has been modified to 5+3+3+4, covering ages 3 to 18. These are some of the many changes that have been brought upon in the new education policy. So today we have certain eminent panelists with us to help us understand the impact of the policy on the industry and on the future of the students. Let me start this discussion by introducing each of the panelists. So first we have Dr. Tarun Anand, the founder of Universal Business School. Dr. Tarun is the chairman and founder of Universal Business School, India's first green B school in Mumbai. Prior to this, he was the youngest managing director for Thomson Reuters, South Asia. He has served as the global head of treasury, leading a $2 billion business across 136 countries and served on the Global Innovation and Venture Board at Reuters. He has worked in London, New York, Hong Kong and across 50 countries and spanning across all 6 continents. He is a TEDx speaker and was awarded the Education Evangelist of India by Great Place to Study. Dr. Tarun pursued his MBA from SP Jain and executive education from Michigan B School, Tuck B School, IE B School. Welcome to the platform, sir. Next, we have Dr. Ashwini Kumar, Pro-Chancellor, Vijay Bhumi University, ex-Director General, NIE, LIT, MEITY, Government of India. Dr. Ashwini is a BE Honours Computer Science from NIT Allahabad, MTech Computer Science from BIT Ranchi and PhD from the University of Rajasthan. He has an experience which spans over 36 years in R&D, administration and the education sector. He has worked in several organizations like ISRO, BARC, Toshiba Corporations, RICO Limited, where he has executed many IT and e-governance projects and helped up in setting up several centers of excellences. He has worked as the managing director for Rajcom and later on headed the National Institute of Electronics and Information Technology as a Director General. He has been working with Vijay Bhumi University for the past 3 years. Welcome, sir. Next, we have Dr. Sharad Maheskar, Pro Vice Chancellor of SVKM's NMIMS Team to be University. Dr. Maheskar graduated in civil engineering from the University of Mumbai in 1978. He subsequently earned his master's and doctoral degrees from IIT Bombay. He has a professional experience in consulting firms in the Middle East of 4 years and an academic experience spanning about 30 years. He has been a member of the Engineering Accreditation Evaluation Committee of National Board of Accreditation, India, and has several programs across the country for accreditation. He has guided 40 students for their MTech dissertation, 3 PhD research scholars in different areas of civil and materials engineering. He has been a member of BIS committee for drafting codes and standard. He has, to his credit, several research papers in international and national journals. And at present, he is the Pro Vice Chancellor for NMIMS University. Welcome, sir. Finally, we have Dr. Amit Patel, Pro Vice Chancellor at Ganpat University. Dr. Amit started working as an executive registrar for Ganpat University, and right now he is the Pro Vice Chancellor and the executive registrar for Ganpat University. Prior to his joining as the registrar, he was the assistant professor for Faculty of Management Services, Ganpat University, for the subject of marketing, supply chain management. He has been with the university since 2005. He possesses the qualities of leadership, organization building, entrepreneurial, and positive go-getter attitude and open-mindedness towards effectively executing his tasks. Student-centric supportive system and implementation of ERP system are some of the standards that he has implemented in his tenure. He is a visionary who has taken the Ganpat University to a new standard. Welcome to the platform, sir.
Namaste. Thank you.
So let's begin this discussion, and Dr. Anand, I would request you to kindly share your opening remarks on the new education policy.
Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and great to be amongst the leaders in education in this part of the world. So I think, I'm very, very pleased with the overall principles of the new policy. They have gone where I think previous governments we should have got this way earlier. I think at least a couple of decades, because the world has changed since 2000. So it's finally come. Better late than never. And what I like about it is the whole aspect of giving more autonomy. That is a great direction, because we know that once you give that kind of ability to professionals like the ones sitting around the table, you're going to make sure that you're going to create wonderful institutions of education with impact. I love the fact of the choice. It's focused on the students and a lot of choice given, whether it's from a discipline choice, credits choice, exit, entry, as you mentioned. Those are really great aspects of this policy. The multidisciplinary is huge. I think that's the way forward, and I'm sure we'll all agree to that. There's also flexibility built in the policy. And I think there is a clear recognition that this rote learning is a thing of the past, and we need to focus on critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. As we go into the new generation, lifespans are going to go from 80 to 100. So we'll be reskilling ourselves at least 6 times, all students in this new generation that is coming. So in that period of time, they'll need to learn how to learn. And I think that's a great focus of the policy. They have mentioned technology, and we know that technology is going to be at the center of what's going to happen in the world of education and in every sector. I would have liked them to go a little more bolder, go a little further in terms of technology becoming a fulcrum in the university system and be injected in every aspect. And I think the transition, what I would have liked to see a little more is the transition of where we are today, with some models given that, okay, affiliate college will move in this direction over this period of time. A university would get, so much time to get itself upstream. So I think those are areas which I know it's said that they will start working on those areas, but it would have been nice because then it gives a clear direction for all the education leaders to follow.
Right, sir. Thank you for the remarks, sir. Dr. Sharma, can you please share your opening remarks?
First of all, thanks to College Dunia for giving this opportunity to discuss on a recent topic which is very much in discussion as a hot topic. And see, basically, if we see, this policy has come up after 34 years. It was last declared framed in 1986. So I think whatever the challenges we were having in the education system, especially with the innovations, with the use of technology, with especially the COVID, with the other circumstances, and the government vision to increase the GER, is a gross enrollment ratio to be increased. I think keeping all this in mind, this policy has been framed up, and I think I can say only one thing which I could feel while going through the policy, that it is basically trying to say that education cannot be confined to institutions. It shall have a fusion of inputs from industry, academia, society, and the government. That's the basic vision of the government of India while framing and declaring this policy, because now things are changing. We are among the youth country in the world. We have got 50% population which is youth. So now we have to give a more freedom in the education system. That's what has been the vision of the government of India.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your remarks. Dr. Maheshkar, can you share your remarks, please?
Yeah. Good afternoon to you all once again, and thank you for the opportunity given to me for expressing my views on this very important topic of the day now, or for the last 1 month. And this also helps me in connecting with my peers, students, and stakeholders. And as my earlier panelists have said, this is indeed something to celebrate on, because we are only seeing the third educational policy since independence. We had the first policy in '68, then the national policy on education in 1986 with slight modifications, and then this education policy in 2020 after very wide consultations. And I must say that the consultation process has been very wide, encompassing all the stakeholders, Gram Panchayats, and MP standing committee panel of the parliament, and all sorts of consultations. So that's a good thing. But of course, consultation is a double-edged sword. It brings in, if you want to satisfy all the stakeholders, you can't do that in the end. But at least you have taken their views into account, and in a democracy, that's very important. I should mention here what I liked about the higher education sector reforms that are being envisaged right now. Of course, the GER, the multidisciplinary and holistic education, which is what we were always looking for, because coming from an engineering background, we used to always work in silos, and we would never even look at other engineering branches. Leave aside our own branch, our own colleagues in other areas. For example, we would hardly look at electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or other engineering. So this is one important thing, to have holistic and multidisciplinary education, not only cutting across engineering, but also liberal arts, and giving some background or basics of economics and what is really affecting our life in a day-to-day manner. Second thing I liked is about the multiple entry and exits, should I say. We went to a Fulbright scholarship, and we were very stunned to see that almost all the students in the US higher education system go to 2 or 3 universities. I was just shocked by this, because we don't have such a system where one can exit and re-enter. So this exit and re-entry policy that is there, getting degrees or recognitions after every year or 2 years, and then making a bank of credits, which a student can always look at and exhibit and show to a new institute where he goes. That's very, very important, so that mobility will be there in India also, wherever a student wants to go. And it should not be viewed as a stigma, which is what we are. Changing institutes is viewed as a stigma here. That's one very important thing. Affiliation system, the third important thing which is there. The Britishers left us in 1947. The affiliation system, we are taken to such a bad level that, like Mumbai University, we have about thousands of plus colleges, and we can't manage them. So this is one important thing, that moving away from the affiliation system and coming to a system where autonomous colleges can be degree granting, and you have only 2 or 3 systems of degree granting, autonomous or a university. And furthermore, removing the several tags of universities that we have, a deemed university, a unitary university, a state private university, and so on, just calling everything as a university now. That's a very important thing. Research focus is also very important for us, because we were spending hardly anything on research, maybe only about 0.6% of GDP. US and Israel and Korea examples have been cited where they're spending a huge amount on research, and that is what is going to help us as a country as such when you go to the next level of education. And I must say that one emphasis that has been given by this education policy is tracking student progress for achieving learning outcomes. In our country, we just look at the results. When the 12th standard results are there, or the graduate exam results are there, we just look at results and say, he has got a first class, he has got this and that. But as a student progresses through his entire program, whether it's a 4-year program or a 12th standard program, whichever program I mean, or whichever stage of his career I mean, giving right inputs to the students at the right point of time, and telling him that this is the area where you need to improve, enhancing the student experience. That is what is going to be very important in the next level of education that we have. So we need to track this. Need to track the student progress to ensure that the learning outcomes are achieved, and that as he goes along is very important. It's not enough if you just tell the student that you have passed with 98%. What he was good at, what he was not good at, how we can improve. That's very, very important in a student's life. And if we tell that at the right point of time, this policy, I think, can be making a great effort towards it. And finally, I must say, although we come from the higher education sector, the efforts made in the early education, these are very, very important. The significant impact it should have if it goes through, because that is the point where the child develops, as is said in the policy. And if these efforts go through, we will be getting in the higher education sector a very good product to work upon, which will be having all-rounded personality and all the traits of a good citizen. So that's very important. Although higher education per se has little to do with that, but we'll be getting a product which is coming through early education and care with the right sort of attitude and so on when the student comes to the universities. And all this with the regulatory insights that have been given is something which we should all in the higher education sector cherish about. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks, sir. Finally, Dr. Patel, can you share your opening remarks?
Thank you, College Dunia, for giving me this opportunity to express my views on New Education Policy 2020 along with learned panelists on the panel. Good afternoon to all learned panelists as well as all the attendees of this program. New Education Policy is a great ambitious plan of Government of India. Theoretically, if everything goes well, probably this plan will transform the entire country, not in terms of education, but it will transform the country in terms of socio-economic graph and put the country on the world map. Yes, there are this big ambitious plan will have had its own challenges as well as issues that in time to come that we will see and we all have to collectively address. Now, according to me, there are certain important aspects that this policy cover apart from my colleagues on the panel who has mentioned. See, I see it from the angle where how this policy has tried to address the challenges of the current ecosystem. This policy has, talked about governance, it talks about the leadership, it talks about the establishment issues of higher education. It has talked about the autonomy, accountability, and transparency into the policy, and addressing one of the biggest concern of the current system is the conflict of interest among the different regulatory bodies. Rather, they have address this challenge with a single regulatory body called National Higher Education Regulatory Authority, and bringing all other institutions under the GEC and removing them from the regulatory role and give them more of the academic role. The light but tight, a very nice phrase which has been used into this education policy, wherein government itself and through this policy wants to empower the higher education institution and allow them to pursue the excellence. At the same time, they are making the higher education institution to publicly accountable through institutional development plan, the achievement of the goal, and getting the funding for achieving those goals, and at the same time disclosure of all their practices, utilization of funds and everything. On the student front, it's a great policy wherein a student can pursue its passion to build its own life. That's the biggest thing this policy talks about. The policy which is encouraging the private philanthropic organization in a bigger way. Currently, the bigger challenges into the existing system is where there are private organizations, they are running the show for the profiteering purpose, which probably the education is not meant for. And this current policy is addressing those things, encouraging the private but philanthropic mission organizations in a bigger way. And there are a lot of opportunity that the government is going to create under this policy. The regulations as well as the policy which is part of this major draft policy will help us understand better in how this policy would help the private philanthropic organization also. The foreign direct investment through allowing foreign campus is also one of the key point which this policy highlights, and that is how the government is trying to bring a world best education practices to the country, and that will in fact bring greater quality practices and improve the overall quality into the entire education system. So this is how the government has given more focus on the right practices, more flexibility, autonomy, accountability, and the open, deregulated ecosystem that they have trying to build on through this new education policy.
Thank you, Dr. Patel, for sharing your views on the policy itself. So so I've got a couple of questions that I would like to address, and Dr. Maheskar will start off the discussion at your end, sir. Adding on to what Dr. Patel just mentioned in terms of investment. So what are your thoughts on how this increased investment in the education by both state and central government impact the sector on a whole and in the longer run?
Yeah, this is a very ambitious policy, I should say, because I did not mention this in my initial remarks. But the devil lies in the implementation. And you can have you can indicate that you want to have some percentage for research and certain percentage for so many initiatives. In fact, there are so many bodies that have been mentioned in the entire policy that if you don't start implementing the policy in the right way, you'll be left behind. So very ambitious plan, but then the outlay that is going to be there has to be seen on the ground and then taken to the implementation level at the ground. Otherwise, you'll not find a lot of benefits out of it. The important thing is that I think the policy says that as far as research is concerned, there will be no differentiation between the private and the public sector. So far as you have the quality of research and the research ambience created in the institute, which is judged by the level of autonomy or gradation, whatever we want to say, but there will be no difference in the private and the public sector. That is one thing. Not only that, at many locations, like for example, regulatory frameworks, the policy says there is no differentiation between a private and a public sector. That I hope comes to real implementation on the ground. So if this is implemented, the outlays are given, because earlier also we have said that will have a huge outlay for research, but then we are not seen on the ground. And especially in this year or two, where we see a lot of problems and challenges in the economy, I'm not sure if we can get the outlay. But then I'm sure that the government has the right heart in implementation of this entire policy, and they will find ways for finding the resources for each of this initiative that they've got. And once done and implemented, because there are excellent leaders in the higher education sector which will take it to a good level. So once the funds are available both in state and central universities, and also research funds available for the private universities and public universities, I'm sure that this policy will bring a big transformation in the entire higher education sector.
Thank you for the remarks, sir. Adding on to your question, Dr. Anand, what challenges, roadblocks do you foresee, like mentioned by Dr. Maheshkar, in the implementation of the policy? So you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So just let's look at today, right? Today, I see on the ground our graduation students in many parts of the country where I visit. I feel India has failed them. When we see our 12th standard student who gets into graduation, and then we see talent at the intake of a master's level, like an MBA program, I see a massive difference, right? So essentially what I'm saying is the 12th grade student, when he starts competing with an MBA student, he can even beat them. So what has happened is that 3 years or 4 years of graduation, we've not added value as such. And this is not specific, but just generally across the country. So from my point of view, what telecom did to India, right? It completely liberated the abilities, and so many livelihoods impacted, and economy boom and productivity, and it's just had an enormous impact. I would have liked someone to take a leap of faith and say, what we did with the telecom industry by freeing them on, could we do the same with the education sector? Because that's talent, right? If you put technology with talent, the magic happens. So I think there is a lot of people trying to second guess and saying this is what, so the intent is right. Coming to the challenges per se, for me, it is this whole federal and state. How are they going to work together, right? Today in the country, if you want to set up a university, every state is different, right? So how do you navigate through the state issues is going to be a challenge which will need to be, sorted in the time to come. I think the faculty has been mentioned as the heart and soul of education sector. Having said that, I still think there is a little bit of prescription out there. I come from the corporate world, and we look at the whole remuneration structures as a CTC, and this is across the world. But here you have to go and you're pushed into, you're trying to refit some 7th pay commission. I don't know why is that required, right? For me, that is, as a private guy, I think as long as you get amazing talent. The other things is the bias on, I with no disrespect, there are some PhDs who do an outstanding job, but I know a lot of industry people who can do an outstanding job and do magic in the classroom. So there should be some association in terms of saying, okay, can we have a mix of both as well? There is a clear focus on teaching universities and research universities. So maybe they could have been that focused in that area. And I think, the foreign universities is there are many more challenges, but I'm going to just end on this one. Foreign universities, you go and talk to the top universities. They don't want to come, right? Why don't they want to come? Because they operate in their respective countries on a for-profit motive, right? Or the ability to have free ability to repatriate the funds. So just by giving a red carpet, and I think previous governments have tried this with the Foreign Universities Bill, but they don't turn. So I think we need to be a little more, yes, we'll get Harvard, but Harvard doesn't want to come, right? So I think there needs to be an understanding, maybe a collaborative approach could have been a better way to get them in, like some of the institutions in India have done a great job. So I think those are some of the challenges. I'm sure there are more, and we can come to that in a bit. So I'll open it up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Sharma, you've been associated with the Government of India for over 33 years and served as the Director General for NIELIT for over 5 years. What do you think that the policy is really targeting?
See, basically, if you see the policy is basically targeting, that the buzzword which we have been listening for last almost 2-3 months, that is Atmanirbhar Bharat. I mean, that's the full vision and the mission of the Government of India, where basically we are trying to cultivate a culture within the education system so that we can promote the Make in India, we can promote the Digital India, we can promote the Skill India, Scale Up India, Startup India, targeting innovation, R&D and patent development. Because during the COVID, we could find that if we become a good manufacturing backup over here, we can do wonders. Because see, the biggest resources for any industry, that is the manpower, which is available in numbers here. We have got a population which is youngest in the world. So that's the resources which we have got. We have to basically cultivate that resources into a productive activity where they can deliver the best. And I think I was hearing to Dr. Tarun Anand. Going further in the question to what you asked, I will just say that he's perfectly right, that it is the time where we have to basically include the industrial background also in the education system, because that's the demand of the time. Because I've been saying in my all experiences that it is very simple to teach somebody on blackboard how to drive a motorcycle. It is a 2-minute lecture. Make the motorcycle, tell the student, press the key, plug the key, press the clutch, it will run. But suppose if he is given to chance to run on the road, I don't think he will take or she will take less than 2 days. So that industrial background or knowledge is required to be plugged in. This is what basically has been done by the committee of the NEP 2020. They are trying to plug in all education system where they are trying to basically involve the industry also as a part of that. Whether, if I remember correctly, when I was there in a committee there in Government of India, I recommended that even why the Vice Chancellor should be from academics background. And that's the reason now Government of India is rethinking that yes, the Vice Chancellor, the directors of the NITs, they can be with academics background. Of course, they can be from industrial background also. Because at that level, what do you need a vision? You need a vision to run the organization. You need a vision to grow the organization. You need a vision to basically cultivate a culture where you can give hands-on to the student. So I think that's the vision of the Government of India, where we are basically trying to take up the activities subsequently in the interest of the citizen. Secondly, what is most important, which I think Dr. Sharad and Dr. Amit also spoke around, I think the Government of India is basically targeting that we must have a multiple entry and multiple exit system to improve the GR's performance, the percentage. Because what is happening is you enter into the first year, you get either you fail or you get a job, you are from a very weaker section, you move out of the college. So government is trying that if you come out from the college, after the first year, you get a diploma, you have got a chance again to come back to college. Once you feel your family life is comfortable, you have earned little bit money with you, again join the college, you do it second year, you get a diploma, certificate, diploma, and subsequently once you do. But there is a time bound, there is a time limit on this. So the basic purpose is that you have got a multiple entry and multiple exit system. So that is what government is trying to do, and they are trying to give maximum autonomy to colleges and universities. If you see, I was very happy to see that, because I am a member in the committee with the AICTE, that this time we allowed online inspection to engineering colleges. So government is trying to say that we must go for use of technology for all type of such inspections. Even now I think UGC has to plan out that, because there is no point in going, making an inspection to a campus, going, searching out papers. See, you have to have a trust on the promoter who is going and cultivating the education system. So I think the thought process has changed, and as Dr. Sharad said, it is a fact that this is the right time. We can use the policy to grow and yield the best to the society, best to the country.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Patel, how crucial do you think the recommendations of NEP are in order to improve the overall quality of education?
See, the current NEP is basically giving more flexibility and autonomy to the higher education institution directly. See, the existing practices wherein the affiliated structure as well as the other regulatory bodies, they are restricting the academic flexibility on the front of for the academic institution, and wherein the students are unable to pursue their passions in terms of choosing the subject mix. Dr. Sharad has rightly pointed out that being an engineer, we have studied our engineering in silos, while in current education, this new education policy addresses the problem of that rigidity also. Second is a STEM is linked with the arts and other liberal education subjects, wherein so the students can have the choice of not only pursuing the technical education or STEM education, but it can pursue the arts and liberal education subjects too. Second, that is, the new education policy is more of addressing not only the problem solving or analytical skill or cognitive learning. It talks about emotional and social learning too. How it will happen? The engagement of the students into the social projects, community-based project, the learning through the research-based activity. Now this blended learning will help the students to grow more socially responsible than the current system, which is making where we are just only mugging up the theories and applying those mug answers into the examination and score the marks, while the new policy is more of a continuous formative assessment it is talking about. The overall quality will certainly improve, because it's not only about just giving the autonomy and flexibility. The policy is talked about the investment into teacher educations also. So teacher training, preparing the teacher, preparing the quality teacher, then expert mentoring systems. These are the key features apart from the National Foundation for Research and everything. So that's basically will certainly help the institutions to bring more quality for the students. The foreign participation into the education ecosystem will also give access to the right quality faculty. Apart from that, Dr. Tarun Anand has rightly pointed out, the new education policy has talked about no barrier into the remuneration to the good quality faculty also. So no 7-pay commission, 6-pay commission. It has talked about a performance-based pay system and for extraordinary payment to the extraordinary faculties also. So the current practices wherein bringing good quality institution, good quality faculty and industry practitioners into the institution is bigger challenge because of the pay and related issues which these policies is talking about. The policy is basically empowering the institution through its own board of governance. So currently the institutions are not empowered. Mostly private institutions, private universities had their own board of governance, but in case of affiliated institution, in terms of even government universities also, wherein the senates are of very high size and which does not serve the purpose of what the education is. So, and that because of there are a lot of interferences also. So that is where the focused IDP based, performance based, the funding will help the good quality institution to grow by bringing the quality in practices which ultimately reflect into the teaching learning outcome.
Thank you, Dr. Patel, for your remarks. Adding on to your remarks, sir, Dr. Maheskar, what will be the new assessing method for assessing the students? Will it help in assessing the students in a better manner? Will it help them in becoming far more ready for the challenges in the real world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The way we have been brought up is, we had been giving a lot of emphasis on the end semester exam, and that's not a good way of assessing a student. We should have a continuous evaluation, a formative assessment, and assessment that will assess a student after a small module or content is delivered, trying to see that he applies that to some situation, do a small thing, small experiments, small projects, and so on, and then moving on to the next part of the curriculum. So formative assessment is very important. That's one important thing, and laying less emphasis on the end semester exam, which is very heavily weighed. That's one important thing. The second important thing is that I think we'll have to move away from our end, even the formative assessment that we have. We should move away from the conventional methods that we have. We should not have a, say, midterm test, midterm 1, midterm 2, and all that should vanish, and you should have a lot of autonomy for the faculty to have assessment in their own manner. Maybe it's a small project, it's a group work, it's a case study, whichever way we want, but not having a 1-hour test and testing a student in that. So there have to be many other ways of assessing a student instead of going for the normal or the standard way of doing it in the form of tests. And this is what is going to have or test a student for his cognitive abilities, for his application abilities, which are very important when you go to the practice. As engineers, when we take a license, we don't have a license in India, but when we practice, we have to have all these abilities of applying your knowledge to a given situation, maybe a complex situation, whatever it is. So what I am saying is that we should give more emphasis on formative assessment in different ways, not in paper pencil, the way we have practiced for years together, assessing students on different ways to his strengths and allowing him to see that he applies to a situation. Maybe it takes time for it, give it a small project, give a presentation, find out the strengths in that evaluation, and then go ahead. And then, as I said earlier, timely inputs, appropriate inputs at this every stage. After having completed the assessment, ensuring that he gets the right feedback, timely feedback, appropriate feedback. That is going to play a very important role. You are muted. You are muted.
You're on mute.
You're mute. Yeah, sorry.
It was a technical error. Dr. Sharma. Yeah. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Dr. Sharma. So what changes in the mindset of the regulatory bodies is required on the new policy? Will the policy enable colleges and higher education institute to gun for better education to the impartation to the students? Will it help? What mindset is required by all the regulatory bodies?
See, one thing is very clear that we have to stop working in silos. This is what basically the new policy is trying to target, that all higher education institutes should be monitored by a single agency except the medical and the law, because they are governed by medical authorities and by the Bar Council of India. But all other, like say engineering college, architecture, pharmaceutical, higher education, they need to be controlled by a single mindset. That's the reason government has created a new body which is under final stage of implementation, where basically they will be monitoring, they will be deciding the parameters to monitor. Why it is required? Because see, what is happening is, for when you are going for a NEC accreditation or for NBA, every authority, every college got a different deemed university, let's say, or let's say private college, let's say government college. Why it is so? College is college, whether I go to a private college or I go to a government college, whether I go to a deemed university or I go to a private university or let's say government university. So government has come out with a concept that there should be single regulatory body, and they should have come out with a parameter which basically evaluate each of them at one thing. Now secondly, what is important is that the regulatory bodies have to come out with open mind. As I said in the last question also, that they have to think that now it is a question where we have to have those who have hands-on in the system, those who understand what is the education system, what is the value they can give to the student. I perfectly agree with Dr. Sharad, who said that we must allow the faculty have their own evaluation system of the student rather than going by a pen paper system. Because I can give a case study, they can do on that. I can give a system study. I can ask them to do some project also. It is basically we are trying to assess the knowledge given to the student and knowledge gained by the student to understand whether it's fit for what level, what percentage, what criteria. So I think this is what basically the regulatory body has to understand. Third is very important, that many colleges we have been talking about infrastructure. I personally feel that the regulatory bodies have to go away with the mindset, especially after the COVID, that infrastructure in terms of building with glasses, building in heart of the city has no value. It is the faculty, it is the innovation emphasis, it is the R&D emphasis, and basically how you are trying to come out with new ideas. That is very important. It is not nothing to do with the building, because building remains there, and that's the reason I think so. Now in the times to come, it is possible there will be university, or there can be universities where basically they will be having faculties from multiple locations. They will be delivering online courses. There will be some mandate of some basic courses within the campus. All courses can be taken up online. So that is what basically the regulatory bodies, whether it is AICTE or the new regulatory body or the UGC or Bar Council, whatever. I mean, today as on date, why should I wait for somebody to come do inspection? If they want to do, let them have a inspection through a system where they can track my working through a technology usage. So that has to come up, and that will give the best. Similarly, the change of faculty from one college to another, that should be restricted, because when we are going for accreditation, that is one of the mandate that faculty should remain minimum 2 to 3 years in a campus. So I think we have to work out that system, and regulatory bodies have to think very openly and have to think that if we are able to give a freedom to the honors of the universities or the regulatory bodies of the universities, they will be in a better to give the right to the society. Because see, sitting in Delhi in air-conditioned room, it is very difficult to assess a situation. The situation which we are having in Karjat and versus in Bombay, versus in Bangalore, versus in Pune is varying. So we have to give freedom to the honors, the policy makers of the institution or the university.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Anand, adding on to Dr. Ashwini's remarks, will the new regulatory system be easier to work with versus the old system?
I certainly hope so. I'd like to just make a brief comment on what Dr. Mahesika mentioned. So I absolutely agree on the formative assessments, and the whole focus should be which the partners have taught us over the years is focusing on creation and evaluation and analysis rather than on memory and understanding, which is the current system. So coming back to your question on regulation, I certainly hope that it's going to be better. I think it is clear that there is some form of skepticism currently that the private sector hai to kuch gadbad hai, right? You must be doing something wrong. I hope that mode of thinking disappears and people see the kind of value private institutions are bringing to the nation. So I hope that's one of the areas I would like the mindset change, right? The bureaucrats' mindset to change. I think the other area I would like to see is speed. We have had several instances where if you want to change a course, right? You want to do something new. You have to work in a very long cycle, and then also you're like praying and hoping and waiting outside these government offices saying, "Pata nahi denge ki nahi." This is not an addition of seats. I'm saying I just want to change something and do something differently. So that has been difficult. I think the other very interesting experience has been a person can set up a brand new university with zero experience in education, but a person who's been doing for 3-5 decades of education cannot. Now I find that, and when I raised it to the secretary, and he looked at me, yeah, you have a point, but it's in the norms. So I think that mindset has to be changed. That I think we need to empower our government to say, you know what, let's make this exception. This makes sense. This is flexibility. do all the due diligence. Absolutely, do whatever due diligence, but this doesn't make sense, right? So I think those are my hope from the new regulatory environment. It's now got 4 institutions, so the magic of them working together will be, something we are all hopeful for.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Patel, continuing this discussion forward, will the common entrance exams, help institution in simplifying the entire admission process, or will it dilute the entire objective that each institute holds near and dear?
We have a best example of CAT and JEE. So that answers all the questions related to the common entrance exams. In fact, the CAT and JEE are the best example, which are running since more than decades, multiple decades, and the institutions who are admitting the students, as well as the students, those who are opting through these mechanisms, are in fact finding it more easier to choose the right institution nationally, instead of going through institution to institution, or university to university, or state to state, and land up into a issue of complexity and confusion. So probably this would be the great solution of having a common entrance test, one for all, will resolve a lot of issues in terms of administration in admission, as well as the students having more choices on the screen itself, where he can choose the institution across the nation through single window. So it's a great opportunity for.
And so, Dr. Sharad, can we have your remarks on the same question, sir? How do you see the common entrance tests helping the institutions?
Yeah, this is a great move. There is no doubt about it. Although we really have at NMIMS our own entrance test, which is doing well, and which was taken by GMAC last year, 4 years back. So I think this is a good move. There is no doubt about it. Only thing is that we need to sit and see what are the common things in each test, and whether we should move from it or into it. And multiple tests is always a problem for students anyway, in terms of resources, money that they spend, and tensions for going to 3, 4, 5 tests. It's only how do you conduct this test. For example, we conduct the CDPI where we come to know the candidate in more detail in person. That can't happen in CAT. So these are final points we need to look at. A common entrance test may be taken as a first starting point, then we go to a CDPI, and then we further do it. So that can be a 2-stage, 3-stage, whatever way you want. But it's a good thing that a student will give only one entrance test, at least for the written test part of it. Then we move on to the other components of it, the way we want to test. That can be added on to the test score that he has, and then we can judge a candidate. All the issues come when we have a large pool to select from. If you don't have a large pool to select from, there's hardly anything to be done. So if the tests are the students, the entire admissions are competitive for a university or a school, then it's very useful to have these tests. Do something in addition to that for judging the other abilities of a student, which we don't judge in a written test or a MCQ or whatever.
Thank you, sir.
I just like to add, I think I must congratulate Dr. Sharad and the university. Their tests have been very flexible and giving certain flexibility which is required, and at times, right, we might not be ready at a particular time. So I think I'm not a fan of one size fits all. I prefer horses for courses.
Right, sir. Dr. Ashwini, your remarks on the same, please. Sir, your mic is muted.
Dr. Ashwini, you are muted.
Yes, sir.
It was a demand of time. Rather, I think it is coming up too late, because it is a fact that when you are having a single exam system, then basically you can say all are running the same race. You can compare each of them. Now what was happening? Somebody is conducting A, somebody is conducting B, somebody is conducting C. Now the pattern of the exam in ABC, all three are different, grading are different. Now somebody say I come from A, I come from B, and I've got 2nd rank in B, but I've got 10th rank in A. Now it was very difficult for the system. So I think it's a good policy, And that's the reason Government of India has even planned out that they will go for a Parakh system, even where they basically, not only for the entrance test also, even when they are going for the placement part also, they have to go through a course where they have to go basically study of the state level agency survey achievements, national level achievements. So I think good idea. And I will say rather they should make that for the jobs also, there should be a single exam. Based on that only, they should be allowed to join a job depending upon your caliber, your interest, and depending upon the, of course, the interview part. Because every job has got a different flavor. Somebody wants to go for education, somebody for industry, somebody for marketing. But there has to be some common parameter to judge a student or to judge a caliber of the student. So I think it's a good idea, and I think very welcome idea. This will not only help the student, as Dr. Sharad said, in terms of money, in terms of pain to parents. There is a pain to students, but there is a pain to parents also. They keep bothering, they keep traveling with, especially the female kids, they keep traveling. And the most important is, there is no parameter to measure or barometer to measure which one is the best out of that. So I think it's a good idea.
I think Dr. Tarun has some remarks on the same. Dr. Tarun.
So when he mentioned about the end test, I had a smile because, every industry and every company differentiates themselves by their selection criteria and the emphasis that they give in terms of an exam. So Google is saying 40% of my employees don't have a degree, right? Now you're going to tell all of those Google employees to go through a particular test. That won't happen. So I'm of a belief that let the institution, whether it's a Coca-Cola or a Google or a Facebook, decide what they want, how they want to train. And if we're going to tell the industry that this is the exam and you got to look at it, I'm sorry, industry is not going to take that. They're going to do their own.
So, I have also one comment on this. It's a good thing to have an entrance exam, which is common, but the inputs given by different schools on different students and how they what they do when they graduate is very important. So now, for example, good companies, MNCs, they are not recruiting the students on their final exam and all that. They look at the portfolio of a student as he graduates to the first to the fourth year. For example, TCS, they're going to stop recruiting students from companies and going to the company and recruiting. They are going to see as a student as he progresses to the first year, second year, third year, fourth year. What are the competitions he has gone through? What is the scholastic records? What are the certifications he has? And eventually, what is the portfolio he's going to have? So that is what is going to be important. And, therefore, having an exam at the graduation is not a good idea. A portfolio of a student over the period of 4 years, again, as you say, formative over the period of 4 years is what is going to be very important. And that is how a student is going to be judged. It is going to be more of an individual than coming to a college and a school and taking the aptitude test and finishing and shortlisting and so on. It's going to be based on formative over the period of 4 years now. And that is going to be there for the industry also.
Right, sir. And Dr. Sharma, and continuing this discussion forward, but can you tell us what actually does the policy be looked at, and what sort of mindset for a common man would be there? A parent, a recent graduate, and a student. What sort of overall mindset will it bring to them?
See, I think it is bringing it's a good impact on the overall as a society, because what is happening is now there is no basically, you can have there is no rigid separation between arts and science, or let's say co-curricular activities or extracurricular activities. So basically it is trying to give an emphasis on what basically you have got in yourself. What impact you can bring to the society, what impact you can bring to the industry, what you can deliver to the society, to the industry. So I think besides education, other things will play a role, and I think that's a very good, because there was a distinction between arts and science that is going. Suppose let's say I am a student of mathematics, but I like going through the history. I may be allowed. That is now going to happen through the NEP 2020. So I think it will bring a good impact on everyone. And finally, as Dr. Tarun, Dr. Sharad, or I think Dr. Amit said, there is no restriction on the salary structure of the faculty. We can attract the best from the industry also. So I think it will bring a good impact overall on everyone.
Quickly, Dr. Amit, what courses do you see becoming more popular going in the future? based on the new policy? Will the traditional courses still hold their mettle going forward, or do you see a lot of diversification?
No, certainly the traditional course will also hold the merit, but the overall the practices as an education institution has to change, wherein the students has to given a lot of choices. So the lot of new areas will certainly emerge as a career, which includes the challenges that world is facing, like climate change, clean air, clean technology, biotechnology. Then all the programs based on the robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are the new areas which is coming up. Apart from that, the sports, the performing art, all these areas will added a great flavor into entire education ecosystem, and these are the areas where the new kids which are more keen to opt as a career, so they will certainly the demand will certainly come. There are a lot of career opportunity which will also emerge into those areas also, apart from the STEM areas which we are talking about. So certainly the new area will take a lead over to the current the old programs also. But yes, the older one will remain as a foundation.
Dr. Sharad, your remarks, sir.
No, this is going to bring a big change in this entire thing, because can you imagine a student doing a 4-year undergraduate program and going to PhD, which was a great hurdle now so far. For example, if you do a 4-year bachelor's program, the 4th year is spent in research. This sort of a combination, going to research is the best combination, because he has done the exhaustive 1-year research and then he's going on to PhD. So all these things, are going to bring a great change. Along with, as Dr. Patel mentioned, sports. We have in our university so many people who play at the state level, and we are not able to account for these abilities in our program. This is a very important thing that we should give weightage to. Otherwise, we will never make sportsmen. So these all abilities, these are very important in the student's life, and they go on to make an individual. For example, you look at the US universities, they don't just look at the SAT score or the ACT score or the GMAT score. When they look at the profile, they look at the other things that a student is able to do. For example, if a student is good at poetry, they would prefer even if the SAT score is less, because there are certain other creative abilities. So these are things which we will be able to gauge and include in our system now, make it more inclusive, and other talents that a student is having can be really accounted for, and you will not force him to bunk classes to play sports. You encourage him to play sports, give value to it. I myself have played some game cricket, so I used to bunk my lectures and go. Suffered a bit, but then in the new system, I would have got some credits for that.
Right, sir. Right, sir.
These are very encouraging things, I should say.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those remarks. And a final question I would like to ask each one of you, and adding on to this discussion going forward, do you see that this policy is going to impact a lot of entrepreneurial ideas, and do you see a sea of entrepreneurs rising because of the advent of this policy? Dr. Anand, your remarks, please.
So I think, before I come to that, I just want to lay one thing, an analogy, right? The PPP model was done such an amazing job in the world of laying down roads and stuff. They are looking at a multidisciplinary research university, Meru. Can we look at this entire Meru being done in a PPP model, which is between public-private, and a BOT model, right? A build, own, and transfer. And let the guys run with it, because government has got more important things to do, and they could, do a lot of that. From an entrepreneurial perspective, I think, yes, the fact that the multidisciplinary thinking is coming, critical thinking is coming, problem solving is coming into the curriculum. I think that mindset of thinking creatively is going to be built at a very young age and foundational. I think doing entrepreneurship is also another area of entrepreneurship is risk. So I think no school can teach you, at least I don't believe so. No school can teach you how to take risks unless and until you have that mindset of doing. But I think the important thing is entrepreneurship is all about failing multiple times before you hit that wonderful idea. And so education system per se is going to find it tough, because there is a pass and you have to go to the next level and the next level. It's not like you fail 4 years and you become a great entrepreneur. So I think we shouldn't look at this as the magic to create entrepreneurship, but certainly it will build some foundational skills.
Dr. Patel, your remarks, please. Thank you, Dr. Dami, for the remarks.
Certainly, in fact, the foundation of NEP is based on preparing the entrepreneurs itself. See, in the current ecosystem wherein choosing a right mix of subject to pursue your passion is dormant, while in this case, the students itself is encouraged to pursue his passion, and hence the students can convert its passion into the business model. So the student can choose a right subject. Say, for example, I just wanted to give you an example. If I am studying artificial intelligence, and in engineering, say, for example, I would like to study a brain behavior. Now, how in current system there is no syllabus where I can study those. While this current system, where it allow me to choose those kind of module, I can edit into that. I can earn the credit. At the same time, I can pursue my passion and convert my ideas into startups or a business organization. So that will certainly encourage. In fact, this policy, when I read it from the perspective of how the Western universities are working, which is exactly what we are currently talking about. The Stanford or a MIT or a Berkeley, what they are practicing today, and how they have created an entire entrepreneurial ecosystem, a Silicon Valley, which is created from Stanford, which we are exactly trying, though after so many years, but yes, we are this NEP has a greater avenue for that. So I am confident that it will certainly create a great opportunity for the entrepreneurial mind.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Dr. Sharad, your remarks, please.
Yeah, so this is this also is an important aspect we should, I think, debate on and discuss. See, the link between research and innovation and realizing the value of the IPR, that's very important. We as students or professors, we don't realize the value of the IPR that we create. So every student that comes to us, whether it's in science or engineering or anywhere, the thought process of research and innovation, converting that idea, whatever innovation you have, into a IPR, and then commercializing it. That has been the story of all US universities. For example, we went to a university in Israel. They were getting 80% of their budget because of a drug discovery which they did 20 years ago. This sort of a thing, we're connecting research, innovation, IPR into commercialization. That should be built in the minds of students, and this is a good pathway because we are giving emphasis to research, to a 4-year undergraduate program, to the NRF, so many other means. But along with that, converting all this link of research, innovation, IPR to commercialization, and making the student dream about it, that if you have this, you can have a company at your young age of 30 which can be doing well, maybe at 35 sell it for $1 billion. This is what the philosophy should be, research, innovation, IPR, commercialization. That should be built in the mind of students.
Thank you for your remarks, sir. And finally, Dr. Ashwini, your remarks on the same question.
See, definitely this NEP 2020 is basically targeting, as I said in the beginning also, that it is targeting the Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the basic aim is that Scale Up India, Startup India, Make in India, like that. So definitely it will help us and basically help the student, because in the education system at the school level also, we are trying to give them a freedom to discover the system and adopt the subjects. It is not like that I wanted to do only history or I wanted to do only arts or science. I can have a combination of both. Even in the school level also, I can plan out, and subsequently, as Dr. Sharad said in the beginning itself, Now this time we'll have a better breed in terms of education to the higher education. So I think they will be more entrepreneur, and it is a time for us to now grow, because this is what we have been targeting. So I think 100% the way it has been planned out, if properly implemented, that's a very important constraint. With different new mindset we have to implement, and if we are able to implement this policy at the school level as well as the college level, I think 100% entrepreneurship जो कहते हैं ना एक जो जुगाड़ होता है उसको हम एक IPR में कन्वर्ट कर पाएंगे, एक हमको साइंटिफिक टूल यूज करके एक उसको पैरामीटर देके हम उसको एक इनोवेशन कह पाएंगे, वो that is only possible once we are going for a new policy.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you all esteemed guests here for sharing your thoughts and sharing your views on the policy and how it is going to impact the entire ecosystem of our education. Thank you so much for being a part of this session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. And stay safe and secure. Namaskar.
Pleasure talking to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you all.